March 26, 1945. Iwo Jima was declared secure, but the man America had been hunting through the black volcanic island was nowhere to be found. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kiribayashi had vanished into the caves, tunnels, smoke, and silence of the battlefield. No formal surrender, no recovered body, no grave his family could stand beside. Just a dead commander, a ruined island, and a wife in Japan who had to understand the worst thing a war can leave behind. Not death itself, but no proof, no farewell, and no place to mourn. That was what Yoshii Kuribayashi inherited after Iwo Jima. Not a clean story of military honor, not the simple comfort of a hero's funeral. She inherited letters. She inherited rumors. She inherited children who still needed food, school, and protection in a defeated country. And she inherited the name of a man Japan praised after death, while his own family had to survive the life he left behind. The cruelest thing Kuribayashi left his family was not a body to bury. It was silence. Subscribe to Drafted History for more forgotten history and declassified stories. Watch till the end, because the truth is not that simple, and comment on your country below. Before Iwo Jima became a battlefield, the Kuribayashi family was not a symbol. It was a household. Tadamichi Kiribayashi had married Yoshii in December 1923, and together they had 3 children, their son Taro, and 2 daughters, Yoko and Takako. Public memory later turned him into the Japanese commander of Iwo Jima, the man who made the Marines pay a terrible price for every yard of ground. But inside his home, he was also a father who wrote letters, gave advice, worried about his children, and left behind ordinary traces of a life that war would later turn into evidence. That is where the tension begins, because Kuribayashi was not a careless fanatic who believed the island could be saved. The United States Marine Corps' own historical account described him as a realist. After the fall of Saipan in June 1944, he was assigned to command the defensive fortress of Iwo Jima. He knew the island's crude airstrips could draw American attention, and he knew that if the United States captured them, Japan itself would be more exposed. He saw only 2 choices: somehow destroy the island's value, which was impossible, or defend it to the death. That meant his family was already living under a sentence, even before the Marines landed. Iwo Jima was small, isolated, and strategically placed between the Mariana Islands and Japan. American planners wanted it for airfields, fighter support, and emergency landings for damaged B-29 bombers. Kuribayashi's job was not truly to win. His job was to delay, bleed, and shock the Americans so badly that the coming invasion of Japan's home islands might look even worse. The National WWII Museum notes that U.S. forces invaded on February 19, 1945, expecting a shorter campaign, but Japanese forces had turned the island into a deadly underground defense system. For Yoshii, Taro, Yoko, and Takako, the first sign that something was wrong did not come from a battlefield report. It came through paper. Kuribayashi wrote home from Iwo Jima. Those letters are the only reason we can still see the family through the fog of the official record. Writer Kumiko Kakashi later built her study of Kuribayashi around surviving documents, including 41 letters he sent to his family from the island. The letters show a man who knew he was walking toward death, but still reached backward toward home. He wrote not like a statue, but like a father trying to keep control over the only thing he still had left, his words. One letter to his son Taro carried the voice of a parent trying to prepare a young man for life without him. Taro had turned 20 in November 1944. In the letter, Kuribayashi emphasized willpower and the difficulty of building a future family as a man. Red lines were drawn beside those warnings, as if the father wanted his son to remember them after everything else had collapsed. It was not battlefield glory. It was a man preparing his child to stand up after the house lost its center. But the letter that cuts deepest was addressed to Yoshii in January 1945. Parts of it were later found blacked out, not by an office censor, not by an American soldier. Yoshii herself had obscured the lines. According to later reporting based on the family's preserved letters, the hidden words included his fear that his remains would likely never return. That one detail changes everything. Yoshii had read the future before the battle reached its end. She knew, before Japan officially had to admit it, that she might never receive her husband's body. Imagine being a wife in wartime Japan, holding that paper in your hands. Outside, the country is demanding loyalty. The military is speaking in the language of honor. Families are expected to endure. A commander's wife is expected to be composed. But inside that letter is a private warning from a man who knows the state may turn his death into glory while leaving his family with nothing to bury. That is the discovery at the heart of the title. What happened to Kuribayashi's family after Iwo Jima did not begin after the island fell. It began when they understood that the official version would never be enough. On February 19, 1945, U.S. Marines came ashore. Kuribayashi did not throw his men into the kind of immediate beach defense the Americans had seen elsewhere. He had placed much of his force in caves, tunnels, bunkers, and concealed gun positions. The land itself became a weapon. For 36 days, Iwo Jima was not one clean battle line. It was a maze of hidden fire, blasted ground, and men fighting from places the enemy often could not see. Nearly 70,000 Marines and about 18,000 Japanese soldiers took part, according to the National WWII Museum. Nearly 7,000 Marines were killed, another 20,000 wounded, and only 216 Japanese soldiers were captured when the island was finally declared secure. Those numbers are usually told as military history, but for the Kuribayashi family, each day of that battle pushed them closer to a different kind of disaster. If Kuribayashi survived, he could be captured. If he died, his body might never be returned. If Japan praised him, that praise could become a burden. If other families lost sons under his command, grief might turn toward the house that carried his name. By late March, the island was closing around him. Later accounts place Kuribayashi's final communications in the last days of the battle, and the exact circumstances of his death remain uncertain. Some accounts say he died in combat. Others point to suicide in the caves. The most careful truth is this: he died on Iwo Jima, and his body was never identified. Even that uncertainty became part of his family's inheritance. No family should have to mourn through a question mark. Yet that is exactly what Yoshii had to do. She was not simply told her husband had died. She had to live with the fact that no remains came home. No final physical proof arrived to close the door. No grave gave the children a place to stand and say, "Here is where our father rests." Instead, the family had letters and memory, while the country around them was falling into defeat. And then came August 15, 1945. Japan surrendered. The empire that had demanded so much sacrifice was broken. The language of victory disappeared overnight, but the human cost remained in every neighborhood. Food was scarce. Cities were damaged. Families had lost fathers, sons, brothers, homes, savings, and certainty. In that new Japan, being the family of a famous war commander did not mean safety. It could mean attention. It could mean resentment. It could mean people came to your door carrying their own pain, looking for someone to answer for it. The post-war life of the Kuribayashi family changed sharply. Japan Forward, reporting on Kinya Fujimoto's interviews and the preserved letters, describes the family as once venerated as the house of the war god. But after the war, Yoshii was left in her 40s with Taro, a university preparatory student, and Takako, about 10 years old. The public image had been honor. The private reality was a widow trying to keep children alive in a country where honor could not buy food. That is the part many heroic battlefield stories leave out. A nation can raise a dead commander high enough to turn him into a legend, but his wife still has to wake up the next morning. She still has to manage the house. She still has to face neighbors. She still has to protect children who did not choose the war, did not command the island, and did not have any power over the men who died there. And then came the visits. Takako later remembered that relatives of soldiers who died on Iwo Jima came to the Kuribayashi house asking for money. That detail is painful because it shows how grief can move after a battle ends. Those families had lost their own men on that same island. Some may have seen Kuribayashi as a hero. Others may have looked at his command and seen the man who led their sons into a fight almost nobody could survive. Whatever their reasons, they came to the house. And Yoshii, already widowed, had to face not only her own loss, but the loss of others. What would you do in that position? If your husband died in a battle the country praised, but the families of the dead came to your door, would you defend him? Would you apologize? Would you stay silent because there is no sentence that can satisfy a parent whose son never came home? That is where the moral pressure rises. Kuribayashi's family was trapped between two versions of the same man. To military historians, he was the commander who studied the American enemy, rejected wasteful tactics where he could, and built a defense that stunned the Marines. To many Japanese mourners, he was connected to a battlefield where thousands never returned. To Yoshii and the children, he was neither a statue nor a strategy. He was the missing father whose absence controlled the rest of their lives. The debate around Kuribayashi has never been simple. Some see him as one of Japan's most capable commanders of the Pacific War. Some focus on the terrible cost of his defense. Some note that he fought for an empire responsible for brutal wartime conduct across Asia. Others point out that he understood Japan's weakness against America better than many of the leaders who sent men to die. The family lived under the shadow of all of that, without the power to rewrite any of it. And the state could not give Yoshii the one thing she needed most: a body. That absence changed the shape of grief. When there is no grave, people often turn objects into graves: a letter, a photograph, a uniform, a stone, a piece of paper with handwriting on it. For the Kuribayashi family, the letters became more than correspondence. They became proof that the man had existed as a husband and father before history swallowed him. In 1965, 20 years after the battle, one small public moment showed how strange that grief had become. René Gagnon, one of the Marines associated with the famous flag-raising photograph on Mount Suribachi, presented Yoshii Kuribayashi with a stone from Mount Suribachi in Tokyo. An Associated Press caption from February 25, 1965, identifies Taro Kuribayashi standing there with his mother as the stone was handed over. Think about that image for a moment. Not bones, not ashes. A stone from the mountain where America's victory became one of the most famous images of the war. For an American viewer, Mount Suribachi often means the flag. For Yoshii, that same mountain meant the island that took her husband and never gave him back. That stone carried both meanings at once: victory and loss, memory and absence, public ceremony and private sorrow. It did not answer where Kuribayashi's body was. It did not heal the family, but it showed that even former enemies understood something had been left unfinished. If you are still watching, subscribe and like the video. Then drop your thoughts in the comments. Was history told right, or are we missing something? By 1970, the wound had moved into another stage. On the 25th anniversary of the landing, Japanese and American veterans met again on Iwo Jima, not to fight, but to stand where the war had trapped them as younger men. The 5th Marine Division Association describes the 1970 reunion as a time of healing and peace, held from February 17 to March 2. Former enemies raised flags, sang national anthems, said prayers, laid wreaths, made speeches, and shook hands on Mount Suribachi. Among those who attended were the widows of General Kuribayashi and Baron Takaichi Nishi. That scene is easy to misunderstand if we make it too soft. It was not a simple happy ending. It was not the war being washed clean. Those widows were not stepping into a place of comfort. They were stepping onto the island that had taken their husbands and thousands of others. Every handshake stood over buried pain. Every wreath was laid in a place where many families still had no remains. Every prayer had to carry both sides at once. But that reunion also changed something. According to the 5th Marine Division Association, one result of the 1970 event was a larger effort to identify and return Japanese war souvenirs to bereaved families in Japan. That matters because souvenirs taken from battlefields were not just objects. To some families, they could be the last trace of someone who vanished. A flag, a personal item, a marked possession, these could become the only physical connection left. So what happened to Kuribayashi's family after Iwo Jima? They did not vanish into comfort. They survived under a name too heavy for any household. Yoshii became a widow without a body to bury. Taro grew into adulthood carrying the letters and the public memory of his father. Takako grew up inside the silence of war, later becoming the person who could describe how relatives of the dead came to their house asking for money. Yoko was part of the family, though the public record speaks less about her. And through all of it, the family preserved the letters instead of letting them disappear. That preservation was not a small act. Paper is fragile, families move, houses change, people die. Shame, grief, and exhaustion make old documents easy to throw away. Yet the Kuribayashi letters remained. Decades later, Taro's daughter Yoshii still kept them carefully, protected in a plastic file with paraffin paper against moisture. The text was still readable, even as the paper deteriorated. That image is almost as powerful as any battlefield photograph. Not a general leading men under fire, but a granddaughter holding fragile pages and facing the question of what a family should do with private grief once it becomes public history. That is the twist. The family's real burden was not only that Kuribayashi died, it was that he became history. Once that happens, a family loses full control over its own dead. Scholars read the letters, journalists ask questions, veterans remember him, governments hold ceremonies, movies and books reshape the image. The world debates whether he was noble, tragic, ruthless, realistic, loyal, or trapped, but a family still remembers the person who left home and never came back. In 2003, Yoshii Kuribayashi died at the age of 99. She had lived nearly 6 decades after Iwo Jima. That means her widowhood lasted longer than many entire lives. She carried the unanswered ending from the ruins of 1945 into the 21st century. Takako died in 2004. Taro died the following year. One by one, the closest living witnesses to the private Kuribayashi home disappeared, leaving the letters and descendants to carry what remained. There is something deeply unsettling about that timeline. Iwo Jima lasted 36 days. Yoshii's aftermath lasted almost 60 years. That is how war really works. The battle ends when commanders declare an island secure. But for families, the war moves into kitchens, letters, school fees, public shame, unanswered questions, and old age. The guns stop, but the missing body keeps speaking. The nation moves on, but the family still has to decide what to preserve, what to say, and what to hide. And the blacked-out letter tells us Yoshii understood that earlier than most. When she covered the lines about his remains likely never returning, she was not erasing history. She may have been protecting herself. She may have been protecting the children. She may have been trying to keep private pain away from eyes that would turn it into legend. But because Taro later rewrote the hidden text, the silence became evidence too. The family did not just preserve Kuribayashi's words, they preserved the wound around them. Modern viewers often ask whether men like Kuribayashi were heroes. That question is too easy when it is asked from a distance. He was a skilled commander. He was also a commander of an imperial army in a brutal war. He cared for his family. He also led men in a battle designed to cost lives. He understood America better than many of his superiors. He still obeyed an order that would leave his own wife without a grave to visit. Every clean label fails somewhere. That is why the family's fate matters more than the legend. It forces us to see the private price behind public honor. When a country calls someone a hero, the family does not automatically receive peace. They may receive visitors, pressure, guilt, expectations, and a version of their loved one that no longer belongs only to them. Yoshitaka Shindo, Takako's son and Kuribayashi's grandson, later became a Japanese political figure, and in a 2024 interview he reflected on the sorrow of war through his family's memory. He said, according to Japan Forward, that the sorrow of war cannot truly be healed, and that it is the responsibility of later generations to make sure the country never experiences such devastation again. That statement matters because it comes from inside the family line, not from a museum wall. The final answer is not that Kuribayashi's family was rewarded, protected, and healed. The answer is harder. Yoshii lived as a widow with no remains to bury. The children grew up under both pride and pain. The family faced hardship after Japan's surrender, including pressure from relatives of men who died on Iwo Jima. They preserved his letters, attended moments of reconciliation, and carried his memory across generations. But the central fact never changed. The commander became famous, while his family had to live with the silence. That silence is the part no monument can fix. Thanks for watching till the end. Subscribe to Drafted History, like the video, and share your thoughts below. Then watch another story from the channel. So when we look back at Iwo Jima, maybe the most disturbing question is not only how many men died on that island. It is what happened afterward to the people waiting at home. If a nation turns a dead commander into a symbol, but his wife and children are left to carry the hunger, blame, missing body, and unanswered letters, then who really pays the final cost of honor?